The public has a long-held fascination with detectives. Detectives see a side of life the average person is never exposed to. In this podcast series, I Catch Killers with Gary Jubilant, I will be interviewing real detectives, taking the audience into their world, a world that is rarely seen by the public. I spent 34 years as a cop. For 25 of those years, I was catching killers. That's what I did for a living. I was a homicide detective. I'm no longer interviewing bad guys, instead I'm interviewing detectives. The guests I've selected are the cops I consider real detectives. Their business was catching bad guys, and they were prepared to go into a world where pressure, risk and sacrifice was the norm. These are their stories. Welcome to part 2 of my conversation with Ian Speed Kennedy. We'll continue on with our discussions re the Anita Cobby case. You should be aware that it's fairly graphic. I'll also seek Ian's thoughts on the 5 offenders convicted of Anita Cobby's murder. Ian will be talking about the courage and dignity of Anita's parents. We'll get his thoughts on all things policing. Join us now. Let's get started. So, with the 5 offenders, tell me about them as individuals and the group dynamics in there. Was there a leader? Was there what were the dynamics?
Yeah, well, no doubt in my mind, Michael Murphy was the leader. He was the escapee. He was the armed robber. He was the oldest. He had Gary, his younger brother, who was pretty low IQ and a pretty basic type of guy.
Yeah.
And Les, who's even younger in a small capacity, like I would call him a tiny halfback, not a small halfback, a tiny halfback. Yeah. Who, in a sense, wants to be bigger than he actually is.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you had Michael Murdoch, who is a very quiet type of guy, but not of high IQ, just a follower.
Yeah.
Which would probably suit Michael Murphy and some of the others ideally, you know.
Yeah.
And he doesn't ask questions, doesn't challenge them. And then you've got John Travers, who was the first person who pulled the knife and cut the throat. He used to have sex with sheep. He'd stand up behind the sheep and have sex, pull their heads back and cut their throat with the knife.
Is that
That's what we were told that he had a habit of doing, and he admitted it.
Yeah.
That's things that he did.
No,
so that's you can see in a sense that he's the one that, and the autopsy showed that her throat was cut from left to right. As if she's facing down and someone right-handed has cut her from the left to the right.
Yeah.
And as I said, not just a slice, not in one action. Some of those, the trachea and some of the muscles in the throat are quite strong.
Yeah.
And against a knife, they'd move, so it's not easy just to slice them.
Yeah.
So you'd have to saw and do it quite hard, and the knife would have to be big and sharp, which it was.
Yeah.
So a horrific neck wounds, and there were 2 exit wounds. So it's been done a couple of times and sawed, where it's gone up once and down once. As I said, they're all low IQ. Mum, Mrs. Murphy, she was much the same. She didn't have any control over all her kids. Most of them had been in trouble as youngsters. Travers was the vicious one, but I think Michael was the one who said, "There she is, let's get her."
Yeah.
He was the first one, I believe, to have sex in the back of the car with her. They stripped her naked, had sex while they were driving, things like that. So I would say that he was the ringleader, and Travers was the vicious person. Pretty cool, pretty quiet, probably didn't say a great deal, but when he just, they said, "Do your own thing, Trawny," which was his nickname, and he just didn't hesitate, just stepped in, bang.
Do you think
done up his sheep, and it just
they were a tragedy waiting to happen, collectively, that group?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
I think we got rid of people that could have caused a hell of a lot of terror in that area by doing the same thing. Just picking up girls, raping them, maybe not killing them all, but she'd heard, and they said the reason they killed her was she'd heard their names, seen their faces and heard their nicknames, Trawny and Mick and other things like that.
So that particular crime and Anita's parents, and I look at the way that they've conducted themselves over the years, and I know the victims of homicide, they've been pivotal in that. What's your thoughts on them?
Wonderful people. Unfortunately, they're both deceased. I went to their funerals. just out of respect, but not so much respect because they were the victims of murder, but just the respect that I had for the way they conducted themselves under enormous pressure. During the trial, when the doctor was giving evidence, I'd already given evidence, and when the pathologist was giving evidence about the wounds, I walked up to both of them and said, look, do you want to come outside with me for 10 minutes or so while he gives us evidence? And Grace just said, look, she's dead now and you can't hurt us anymore. And they were just lovely people. Gary was joined the Homicide Victim Support Group, and he was also on the parole board of New South Wales. And from what I understand, he conducted himself exceptionally fairly while he was on that.
That says so much about him as a person, doesn't it?
Yes,
that he could
yes.
put himself in that position, still look at things objectively,
Yes.
and make a decision based on merit.
Well,
That's
yes,
incredible.
and it also says a lot, in a sense, about the other people, that they recognise that he could be a threat on in that position with his bias, but he didn't have a bias. So I think that's an acknowledgement of the type of person that he was.
I've heard him speak at a few different locations and functions.
Well, I used to take him along sometimes after it, I'd get invited to talk about it to detectives and to various stations about how they should not so much investigate the homicide, what they do when they find one and things like that. And I'd take him along sometimes and he'd talk about to them, and he'd say exactly the same things. Ian kept me informed from day one right through, just about every day, and I want you to do the same to people. You've just got to, they're keen to know what's happened to the investigation of their loved one, and we've got an obligation. So he was very impressive.
Can learn so much from that, like on the homicide course or detectives course, when you bring the families of victims down to talk, and you look at the detectives and they sit there spellbound, and they learn so much from it when they're exposed to that, and someone that's been through the pain that those families have been through. Speaking of courses, that's I remember you from you were the big scary dude running the inaugural homicide course. That you came down there. I think there was Russell Oxford and Paul Jacob were down there at the time.
In the course
well.
at the time, I think. Well, it was out of the blue. Someone from the academy just said, would you be available to give a lecture down here? We heard I'd do it to Lions groups and things like that with their interests, and someone found out that I was talking to various community groups and said, would you come down and do it to the detectives course, which I did, because there's things to be learnt from it, and so I went down and seeing people that I knew, such as yourself and others. It was important because you just never know what you're going to learn from different things.
It's like a lineage that's passed on too. Experienced homicide detectives or experienced detectives, police officers in whatever field. You're passing on that lineage, that experience that needs to be passed on. And I think there was a cut-off for detectives at the Royal Commission stage, where detectives and we went through it, and detectives were shamed and all that, and some of that lineage was lost. The passing on the tradition of detectives and the skill set.
The respect that people and uniformed police had for detectives had been lost a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point.
A lot of them didn't want to go into the plain clothes because they could see that there was. I'm not saying that they could see corruption, but they could see that they were under investigation for bad habits and different things. Maybe they chose, I don't think I'll go into plain clothes. So it was important that we try and regenerate the interest in going into plain clothes.
And maintain the pride in it. Your time in homicide, we're talking about homicide, and what did you take away from your almost a decade in homicide?
Cross your T's and dot your I's. I learned about the importance of learning your evidence. Since I left the police in 1999, quite a few years later, I was asked, would you like to work a couple of days a week? What are you doing? And I was bored at retirement. You can't read books and do the crosswords all day type of thing. Watch TV. I'm not a real TV watcher unless it's sport, I suppose. But so they said, look, would you like to join corrective services in the court system? And what that means is that I go to court, say, let's say Darlinghurst District Court, where they did the murder trial, the Murphy trial, and they have cells there where they keep the prisoners, and the prisoners come in on a truck, and then we're there to take them into court, to sit in court so they can't escape.
Yep.
So they're there to hear the evidence, etc., etc. And then we take them back, and that goes on while the trial's going on. And just for other people who come up and plead guilty, and we've got to take the record of what it was and give it to, when we get back to the cells, give it to the boss there so that they know who can be released and who has to go back to jail and things like that. And I enjoyed it because I saw a lot of the judges, a lot of the barristers that I knew, some of the criminals that I knew that were there, and it was work that I'd been interested in all my life, and so this continued. So I resumed that interest again.
And it would have been interesting seeing it from a different perspective. And I remember I was at a murder trial, and I see a prisoner brought up, and you've brought the prisoner up, and that confused hell out of me until I worked out what was going on. Yeah. But you get the opportunity to see a lot of detectives give evidence.
Yes, and that's the point I was going to come to. When you're in the homicide squad and you give your evidence, you've normally got a fairly lengthy statement of evidence because it entails your participation originally, then some of the major investigation parts that you do in that inquiry, who you speak to, especially if you're talking to the accused that you're giving evidence against. And for the Anita Cobby murder, my statement was something like 14, 15 pages long, which is not unusual for a murder inquiry that goes for a couple of months. And so out of habit, we learn that evidence because we always did. They allow, after a certain while, if you give your evidence and then you get exhausted because you just can't remember where you're at, they'll allow you to refresh your memory by either looking at it or reading it. Some judges also just allow, and by consent with the defence, they allow people to get in the witness box. Have you got your statement in front of you? Will you read your statement? So they don't have to learn it. But some barristers say, well, I want them to give their evidence because they may question certain parts about it, and they want to, in a sense, probably put them on edge that they've got to remember it. So I had 14 pages of evidence to learn, which included a lot of I said, he said's, where I'm talking to people and giving the evidence of what the conversation was. And I think that's a big difference. I've been in court with corrective services where a police officer got in the witness box and was sworn in, and then they said, okay, will you give your evidence? So this police person pulled their statement out and started to read it, and the defence objected and said, excuse me, but no, I'm not accepting her reading it. I want her to give her evidence. And so they said, well, would you give your evidence? And she said, well, I haven't read it. I thought I would be able to read it. Defence said no, so they had to stand her down for a day and let her go. She came back the next day and gave some of it and got to a stage where she just couldn't remember it because she was extremely, I'm saying she, it was a female officer, but she just couldn't remember. She got excited or nervous and just couldn't remember it all. Now, by learning your evidence, you're learning every part of it, every brief. You're not going to get caught out on something, in a sense. It's being professional.
I remember when I first went into plain clothes, and it was in the late 80s. So when I'm saying plain clothes, going into the detective's office and you're starting to lock up more offenders and getting more time in court. And my memory of that period of time in my life was every Sunday afternoon I'd be at home reading over statements, trying to learn them verbatim because I was going to be in the witness box. And you're quite right, you knew the statement back to front. And I would have highlight pens. I said, he said, so I could remember the conversation. Then my poor wife would have to sit there while I rehearsed it.
I've done exactly the same. Read my evidence or given my evidence to my wife, and she picks up a couple of, it might be a word. But when I'm giving it, then I remember that word's there and you say it. So you've learned it thoroughly.
And see
and it's also, it looks impressive in front of a jury when you're giving your evidence rather than reading it. You know, and I think a jury gets the sense of this man's telling it because this is how it happened.
Yes.
He doesn't need to look at his papers. He knows what it is because he remembers it.
And it did give you a confidence when you went into the witness box that you knew it like that. And the moment you got your statement out, when you've given your evidence in chief, you've managed to remember 10 pages of conversation and you've given that. And then I sat there, and from my point of view, it was happy days. Okay, throw the questions at me now. I'm ready for it.
I'm not sure if it was this. It was in the Cobby mood or another one that I did, and I gave evidence, and then I was cross-examined. He said, "But didn't you say this?" And I said, "No, I think I said that." I said, "Look, it's at the top of page 9, about line 5 in my statement."
Yeah.
And so the police prosecutor then, or the Crown prosecutor got up. I tender his statement. Have a look at line 5, page 9.
Yeah.
I knew where it was. And the words were right. And the defence had a copy of my statement. They knew. They were trying to trick me. But I just knew where it was because I could see it in my mind.
And that does create an impression on the mind of the jury. It makes it very hard for you to be cross-examined.
Absolutely.
And it is a skill that we've lost. And I'd take it even further in what I've seen in the changes in detectives giving evidence, that they're worried about being criticised. Now, in your day, probably more so than my day, but it was accepted that I get in the witness box, regardless of whether I've done something wrong, I am going to get attacked and criticised. And that was part of it, and it was how I stood up to that attack. And
I also think we had better skilled defence lawyers than there are today.
Yes,
And admittedly, a lot of them don't. The proof is a little bit more these days for some reason or other, and they get told, listen, plead guilty because you'll get a discount. So there's a lot more cooks now pleading guilty to things that they would have run it just on the basis of being an arsehole. And let's just give the cops a hard time. I think now they're pleading guilty now because they can get the discount on the sentence.
Get the discount. The other thing is that a lot of detectives, and I've had detectives come to homicide that haven't given evidence at court. And I'm horrified. Like, from a detective's point of view, it's not their fault.
It doesn't mean they've got clean briefs.
It's just sometimes people are pleading guilty or different things with the forensic evidence. But I feel sorry for them when their first test of how they go in the witness box, because I cut my teeth in the local court and I got bashed and I'd get out, my tie would be round my neck and I'd be sweating.
But I also think that prosecutors in local courts, prosecutors and magistrates, they've got a lot of work, and I think they basically say to the defence, can they read their statement? Does he have to learn his statement, and that you can cross-examine him? And they come to an agreement, look, just hop in the box and read your statement. So the police don't even take the time. I'd still take the time to make sure I read it and knew exactly what it was rather than just read it.
Well, so that's old skill, old detective skills.
That we got taught to learn it.
And it was drummed into you, and it's something that you can't forget. But
it's more impressive in front of a jury when you're saying it off the top of your head than you are just by reading it.
Well, I think we've got to be realistic what the jury system is about. It's people offering or making opinions on their life experience. So they're assessing you not just on the words that's been said, but on your demeanour, the way you're responding to questions and all that. And
the confidence you've got in giving your evidence.
And that's what I'm trying to bring back, when I was in the police, giving the detectives or the police the confidence. We haven't done anything wrong.
That's right.
Get in there and stand your ground. And you know your brief, you know your evidence, get in there, and it makes an impression, because it's a theatre in court, regardless of what they say, and I understand the rules of evidence and all that, but it's still, you put it in front of a jury and it becomes somewhat of a theatre. And that's why the defence barristers carrying on the way they do, and they're just criticising them.
I also think defence barristers get people to plead not guilty so they can make more money.
How dare I say
something like that?
Yes,
but seriously,
that noble profession.
Since I was working in the courts for corrective services after the police, I would sit there in some trials and say, what in the hell is this bloke pleading not guilty to? The evidence was overwhelming. And it's legal aid, or it's self-paid for, and I can look straight at him and... it's so obvious.
Honestly, think you're stating the obvious there, because quite often I go to trial and you
let me say, there's also some very honest lawyers and that. I'm not saying they're all coloured. They all do the same. But
there's some characters too. Yeah. There's some characters there. So your time in the police, you've had your time in uniform. You've had your time in detectives, and that's local detectives, armed hold-up squad, homicide squad. You've been a negotiator. You've been in SWAS. Have you? What's your favourite part? Have you got a favourite part, or is it a combination?
I think being in the CIB with the armed hold-up squad and the homicide squad they're the two major crimes, two heaviest penalty crimes in a sense, apart from say kidnapping or something like that. But working there, being able to go from one to the other, having proved myself, I think that's the thing I look at and appreciate most. That I got given a hard job to do as a detective when I first got called in. I met the standards. And I continued it. I'm proud of that. I'm sure my grandfather would be very proud of it. And he was an important part in my life in getting into the police. He knew Jock Armstrong, who was the boss of the police academy. Yeah. And he rang him up and said, "Good day, Jock." And I graduated from Redfern. Yeah. You might have been Goulburn, weren't you?
The second or third class down in
Goulburn. Yeah, well, I was at Redfern. And we're talking about Redfern Police Academy, where the horse stables are. That was where I did my initial training. And I remember after we all marched out, they'd put us in the gym for tea with the parents and everything. And Norman Allen was the commissioner. And my grandfather was bigger than I am, and I'm a big bloke, 6'4", and whatever.
No, shrinking violent.
And my grandfather was bigger than I was, and we were standing there. It was my mum and my dad and my sister and my uncle and my grandfather. And Norman Allen walked in, and came in one door, and we were about 60 feet, 70 feet or whatever away from him. And my grandfather looked over, "Allen, young Allen, get over here." And he's calling out the commissioner. The commissioner looked up and said, "Mr. Kennedy," and came marching across, and just past everyone, come over, and he said, "This is my grandson," and introduced me to Norman Allen there straight away. Well, I'm embarrassed here. "Allen, get over here," But he trained Norman Allen. So that was so when he rang the boss of the academy and said, "Look, my grandson wants to join the police. Can I get him an interview?" So they rang up straight away and said, "Can you come in?" I went in and I got put in a class straight away. Otherwise, I'd have had to wait about 3 or 4 months. And the important thing of that, as you know, was your seniority. It meant that in those days, if I joined in April and someone joined in November, that if a vacancy came up, I could get the vacancy if I wanted it, if I was the next numbered person to get the job, rather than the bloke who joined in November.
It was called the stud book, wasn't it? The stud book. So if you joined ahead of me, you're ahead of me.
Well, to explain, the stud book has your name and your registered number. And it's all in registered number order. So you knew where you were in the pecking order and as to how... And there was, you knew it was 5 years till you got senior constable and 9 years till you got sergeant and things like that. But it was seniority if you wanted the job. Otherwise, people would go. Well, I remember people having the stud book at the station, and they'd get a text message that come through saying, "Oh, Billy Bloggs has died," and so they'd say, "Billy Bloggs, I know Billy Bloggs," and they'd look it up. And they'd cross him out of the stud book because he was dead.
He's a good bloke, but now that he's gone...
I work with Billy. What a really nice bloke. Well, they're crossing his name out. And as if to say... And then they'd count. Bang, bang, bang. Oh, I'm 5 away from sergeant now. It was ghastly.
Who do you, like within the cops, have you got someone that you, like I say, if people say who trained me, I'd rattle off a couple of names. Jim Williams, early days in plainclothes, Paul Jacob, Andy Waterman, that type of... Have you got someone that was a mentor to you?
I got about 3 or 4. Yeah. When you work in the armed hold-up squad and the homicide, you've got people that you really respect that... And John Burke was one. John Burke was a detective, as I said, at Darlinghurst when I was in uniform. And then when I was at Maroubra, we got involved with a few armed hold-up squads and they'd come out and investigate them and we'd work with them. So I got to know him pretty well. And John, later on, he worked with the AFP. and got sent over to America to the FBI and whatever. Very, very respected Detective John Burke. Dennis Gilligan, Brian Harding. And all that crew that I worked in the Armed Hollow Squad and some in the Homicide Squad, all people, I don't want to put one more than the other. No. They're all people that I learnt from, that I respected. And as I said about Roger, I want to say something. We were in the SWAS and we used to train a lot because you had to be reasonably fit. And so we'd get together down at the main some mornings when we started work at 8:30. We'd meet at 7 o'clock and we'd go for a run. We might do it in Centennial Park. And Roger wasn't a real athlete, but he'd push himself. You know, and he'd run and he wasn't the world's best runner, but he'd do it. He'd never give up. And that was a thing that I admired him for, that he just never ever gave up things that he wasn't good at. So, you know, you respect all those guys because you see the different things, traits that they've got, the different skills that they've learnt that you can learn from.
But it is a team. It's a team sport, isn't it? And I think with your rugby background, because you've been very big in rugby, I want to ask, like when you left the Cops, you coached New South Wales rugby union team.
I had the
That's
Australian,
a big career change.
I'd been doing it for a while. I was coach of the Australian under-21 team for 6 years. And I was doing that part-time while I was working, you know, and I'd have to sometimes swap my shifts so I could get to training and get to games. And we used to work, as you know, 10 days and 4 off. But sometimes you could, sometimes you had to swap because you had court matters on days that, like a Monday or Tuesday or a Thursday, Friday, depending what days you had off. And we normally had every second weekend off. So sometimes you'd have to change your shifts. Well, you know, through the cooperation of the boss and the other blokes on the squad to make sure that they weren't short one day type of thing, you'd manage to swap your shifts. So I could get away to training or I could get away to games.
I think having that interest, because you can become so focused on your police work, it is good to step away and have an external interest.
Absolutely.
And the team dynamics in team sport lends itself perfectly to an investigative team.
That's the most important part about it. If you're a member of a team, you're going to have more success than if you're a lone star type of thing.
Yeah. But it's it's interesting to have that balance. So, reflection on your time in the Cops. Anything that you would change or?
No, not really. When I joined, there was a 5'9" height limit, and they've reduced that, which is good because there's some sensational police that are small, and they wouldn't have got in many years ago. It also has a sense of a drawback sometimes. I see some uniformed police that are very small, and the street crooks today, the young smartasses, they'll take them on and give them shit, put shit on them, call them names, things like that. Whereas taller blokes sometimes they wouldn't be game to.
I think when you talk with the police but when they've taken the height restrictions down and the more representative of the community, it's not all 6'2" and that. But do you also find, because I've found during my career, some police have got the gift of the gab, and they're not the ones that get assaulted, and others are the ones that, when I'm working in uniform, there's one person that was assaulted 20 times in 12 months because they don't know how to talk to people. Is that another skill?
You're very right. In all the training that the police do, they don't do how you talk to people. Maybe they need hostage negotiation training as part of their training, what to do under certain circumstances and things like that. But that is also part, I think, of the people who decide which persons come into the police force by their interviews. I think they need to interview them a little bit, put them under pressure in some sort of scenario and see how they react. What would you do in this situation? And give them some scenario to do and decide. It's not easy.
Because a skill, and you learn this through negotiators, but a skilled conversation, you can diffuse most situations. And like I have people come after me, hard guys going, I'm going to do this to you. You might be able to, but after you beat me up, I'm going to arrest you. And you can diffuse that way.
I agree, but I also think that the mentality of younger kids these days, not right across the board, but in some areas, is very low, and they've got a hatred of the cops. So they're not prepared. It doesn't matter what good talker you are; they're not interested.
No, that's true. That's true.
If you go out west, some of the people out west, and I'm saying this, especially there's a lot of people from European and African countries that are gangs now that are causing problems, and you can't talk to them.
Yeah.
They're on the dole. They don't want to do anything else, and they're just they're committing crimes and getting away with it.
Yep.
I'm not so sure that we're doing enough to stop it, but I think that they're not prepared to talk to you anyway. And maybe we don't give our police enough training in negotiation.
Well, there's with all the training and all the conversation skills, there is a point in time when sometimes you just got to roll the sleeves up and punch on, if that's what's needed. But my daughter was looking at joining the cops, and I've got a son. He's older than my daughter, and he's a sort of relatively tough guy, and we were worried about my daughter joining the cops because she could carve us up in a conversation. And like if I argue with my daughter, she beats me every time. But as my son said, there's going to be a point in time if she does join the police where conversation's not going to cut it, and that's there's a lot of skills.
That's scary.
Yeah, it is scary, and there's a lot of skills involved in policing. One thing that scares me at the moment, I would hate this, is the amount. Have you seen what they wear? Like the uniform police, you've got a
chasing people is impossible.
But you've got a taser, you've got this, you've got that, you've got spray.
Handcuff, battens.
In our day we had a gun, you had your fists in your hands and a big batten. And
in my day we didn't have hand radios. The only radio was in the car.
Well, it is a different world, definitely a different world. But so look, having spent time with you, talking like this, one thing that comes across clearly is that you loved your time in the cops.
Oh yeah, I'd recommend it to young kids as an adventure. You've got to rise to it. You've got to be responsible for your actions all the time. I mean, it's very easy for someone to lose your temper and do something wrong. It's very easy to be afraid to do something. I had a great time because I worked with good people and I had good training, and because I was a third generation, I was always conscious that I had to do the right thing. I didn't want to be someone that brought disgrace on my family with their reputation.
That's very interesting.
So that was always sitting on my shoulders. I just always felt that I had to do the right thing. I'm glad that I chose that career. I was lost for a while, for a couple of years after I left school, just not knowing what to do. I didn't want to join the police because I felt under pressure from my grandfather. But then it just turned around. I thought, well, okay, I'm not doing much here now. I may as well get in and do something. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I played football with the police, so I got to relax and represent the police in rugby and meet a lot more people, variety of people. There's a lot of footballers that join the police. You've got to decide if you want to do something just about different every day. Well, the police is a good job for it.
Quite often,
the pay's good. The holidays that you get are good. The opportunities to go interstate. I've been overseas. I went to New Zealand on some inquiries. I went to England on an inquiry. I've been to South Africa on murder inquiries and things like that. That was just a bonus, doing all that.
Do you sit there sometimes? Because I do sit there sometimes and think, I'm getting paid for this. Like it is an adventure. The experiences it gives you and the type of things.
I just say it is a job for males and females. I'd like to see more female detectives.
Yes, definitely.
Because I think sometimes you need. I would sometimes like to have, on say a murder inquiry like the Anita Cobby, maybe had a female with me while I was interviewing it. She might have been able to pick up on female type things about asking questions.
100%. It brings a different dynamics to the interview room and to the team. Yeah, for sure. I agree, and sadly, we just haven't got enough females in detectives.
No, I can imagine sometimes girls don't want to go in an area where they've got to look at the bodies. They've got to talk to people about killing people.
Yeah,
It's not pleasant. It is pleasant when you do it and you get the right result.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and
yeah,
you get
yeah.
you get the right person. That's and to me, that's the best part about being a detective. If you get a result, I've solved someone's problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's good. I've done the right thing. I've worked hard, and I've got a result.
You come home and there's a feeling of contentment, isn't there?
Absolutely.
I know the feeling where you get home and think, okay, I don't care what else is going on.
No.
I'm pretty happy with what's happened today.
You know, when your peers and when your bosses and that slap you on the shoulder and say, "Come on, let's go down the pub and I'll buy you a beer and for a job well done." That means more sometimes than other jobs that you do.
Yeah, it's a good feeling and certainly satisfaction.
Yep.
Now, I'm going to finish off, and this is you'll probably hate me for
You're
it.
scaring me now.
No. I want you to be honest. Of course you will be honest. You're a detective. Lots of fictional TV characters, detectives in the movies and that. Who do you see yourself closely aligned to?
No, I can't answer. I
If you don't answer it, I'll answer it.
you go for it because I don't. No, I've got no idea.
All right, he's gone shy. After all this, he's
I
gone
just
shy.
can't think of who the police who you're thinking about and things like that.
I don't know. Dirty Harry comes to mind. Clint Eastwood.
I'd rather you say something like that and you make a fool of yourself.
No, I'm the interviewer here. Don't you understand? I'm looking at Clint Eastwood. I don't know. Maybe I'm misreading it, but that's what I'm seeing. It's been an absolute pleasure sitting down having a chat with you. I really appreciate you coming on here, and I think people have got an insight into what detectives actually do, and if anyone embodies what the detective should be, I think it's you. So thank you so much.
Let me say it's nice of you to say it. I know your record. You're a great investigator. Not that we work together, but you talk to other people and you know people, and you know I know your background and how good you worked. I know the trauma that you've been going through over William Tyrrell missing person. I know the effort that you've put into it, and unfortunately you're just not getting results either because people won't say it, or there's something there that is just not available. And what you did with a very difficult inquiry was put your heart and soul into it, and you got a kick in the teeth by people who wouldn't have a clue how to investigate a missing person or a murder. And I feel sorry for the fact that you're now in a non-investigative type role because you're out of the police force, and we've lost that experience.
Yeah. So, that means a lot. Thanks, Ian. But I'm still standing.
I know.
Cheers.
I know. Yeah,
it's been great.
You've got knife wounds in your back, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, there's a bit of blood there, but I'm fine. I'll come out swinging at some point in time.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I make no secret of the fact that it was detectives like Ian were the people I was aspiring to be like when I joined the cops. He's as tough as they come and did what he was supposed to do, and that was put away the bad guys. You think tough guys are one-dimensional, but as you can see, there are so many layers to Ian. His integrity and intelligence shine through. I think having listened to that, you also get an understanding of the fact how much he cared about the victims, which I personally think is one of the most important qualities as a detective. He's such an interesting person. After I finished the podcast, we had lunch and a few beers and a few laughs, during which he told me a story about carrying a workmate down 4 flights of stairs after he'd been shot in the stomach during the raid because the stretcher couldn't get him down there. It just made me wonder how many stories Ian has, if he didn't think that was something worth mentioning during the podcast. I hope you enjoyed your time with Ian. Cheers. I Catch Killers is published by True Crime Australia, produced by Claire Harvey from the Sunday Telegraph and Dylan Adams at Made in Katana. I'm now an investigative journalist at News Corp Australia, attached to the Sunday Telegraph. If you like the podcast, please subscribe to our newspapers.